Prichard Colón was 16-0, young, gifted, and destined for a world title. But in 2015, one fight changed everything. That night left him in a coma, and he's been in a wheelchair ever since. Yet what most don't know is the hidden controversy. Repeated illegal punches, ignored warnings, and the aftermath boxing still hasn't answered for. But in this video, we will cover it all. Prichard Colón's story begins in Maitland, Florida, where he was born on September 19, 1992, to a proud Puerto Rican family. From the start, his life was marked by balance. On one hand, he was an intelligent, curious child who excelled academically. On the other, he was gifted with raw athletic ability that set him apart from his peers. When most kids his age were chasing hobbies, Prichard was splitting his time between classrooms and gyms, determined to live up to the high expectations his father, Prichard Colón, placed on him. But Prichard was more than a fighter's kid. He was driven. Even in his earliest days in Puerto Rico, where the family eventually settled, he stood out for his discipline. By the time he was 6 years old, he had gloves on his hands and a dream in his head. Boxing wasn't just a sport for him, it was a calling. The discipline of training, the sharpness of learning combinations, the physical and mental grind, it fit him perfectly. Coaches spotted his natural rhythm, his footwork, and the speed of his jab. Outside the ring, Colón was just as remarkable. Unlike many fighters who saw boxing as their only way out of hardship, Prichard valued education. He enrolled in the University of Puerto Rico, majoring in exercise physiology. He studied the body with the same intensity that he trained it, learning how muscles work, how endurance was built, and how recovery could be optimized. Few fighters can say they were earning a degree while climbing through the amateur ranks, but Colón was one of them. What most people never knew about Prichard was that he could have easily chosen another path. He could have built a career in science, fitness, or medicine. He was smart enough, disciplined enough, and motivated enough, but he chose boxing. He chose the path that carried glory and danger, a path that would make him a hero in Puerto Rico, but also one that would lead to a tragedy no one could have imagined. And as he stepped into the amateur ranks, it became clear this wasn't just a gifted kid. This was a future champion. Prichard Colón's amateur career wasn't just good, it was extraordinary. He compiled an impressive record of 170 wins and only 15 losses, establishing himself as one of the best prospects to ever come out of Puerto Rico. His style was aggressive but smart, built on speed and precision rather than reckless power. He had the kind of jab that snapped heads back and combinations that could overwhelm even the most disciplined fighters. In 2010, he represented Puerto Rico at the Pan American Youth Championships. It was here that he truly made his mark, capturing the gold medal and earning international recognition. For a moment, the boxing world had to take notice. There was a new Puerto Rican phenom, a young man who carried not just the hopes of his family, but of an entire island that has long celebrated its boxing heroes. Naturally, the Olympics were the dream. Colón pushed hard for a spot at the 2012 London Games. But here, politics struck. Despite his qualifications, despite his record, and despite his hunger, Colón didn't make it through. The Puerto Rican Federation made decisions that left him sidelined, sparking quiet frustrations within his camp. For the first time, Prichard felt the sting of how boxing politics could derail even the most deserving athletes. Still, Colón wasn't the kind to sulk. He kept moving forward. At the same time he was chasing Olympic glory, he was also chasing academic achievement. He graduated from the University of Puerto Rico with a degree in exercise physiology, proof that he was building a future beyond boxing. It was a dual pursuit few fighters could match, the scholar and the fighter, balancing two demanding worlds. But for Colón, the pull of the ring was too strong. Even though the Olympics had slipped through his fingers, he knew his destiny lay in the professional ranks. And when he turned pro in 2012, he wasn't just another name on a card. He was the young star fans whispered about, the one with the smile of a student and the fists of a destroyer. And when he stepped into the professional world, the pace of his rise would be breathtaking. When Prichard Colón entered the professional scene in 2012, it didn't take long for his presence to be felt. Nicknamed Dig It, he had a style that translated perfectly to the pro ranks. He was fast, powerful, and aggressive, with a jab that broke rhythm and opened opponents up for punishing combinations. In a sport where flash often matters as much as substance, Colón had both. From his debut, he carved out an undefeated path. By the time he was 3 years into his pro career, his record stood at a perfect 16-0, with 13 of those victories coming by knockout. Fans loved his energy. He fought with urgency, the kind that made every round feel like something could explode at any second. On undercards, he stole attention. In small venues, he packed crowds. But it wasn't just the wins, it was who he was. Colón spoke well, carried himself with respect, and had a charisma that promoters noticed. Puerto Rico, long proud of its boxing lineage with names like Felix Trinidad and Miguel Cotto, saw him as the next torchbearer. He was marketable, talented, and, most importantly, undefeated. Still, trouble lurked beneath the surface. His management choices weren't always steady. Critics argued that he was sometimes matched against opponents that didn't elevate his profile enough, or that he was being moved too quickly without the right protective guidance. Others whispered that his team was taking risks to keep him busy, rather than carefully steering him toward a title shot, but Colón didn't complain. He was a fighter through and through, and by 2015, he was ready for bigger challenges, tougher opponents, and higher stakes. The kind of fights that would define him. And in October of that year, he would get exactly that. But it would turn into the night that changed his life forever. On October 17, 2015, Prichard Colón walked into Eagle Bank Arena in Fairfax, Virginia, for what was supposed to be another step toward stardom. His opponent, Terrel Williams, was less known but dangerous. A strong, rangy fighter with a style that made him difficult to read. On paper, Colón was still the favorite. He was undefeated, fast, and hungry. But as the rounds unfolded, the fight began taking a dark turn. From the very start, Williams repeatedly landed rabbit punches, blows to the back of the head, an area fighters are taught is off-limits because of the severe damage it can cause. Colón complained to referee Joe Cooper multiple times, gesturing at the back of his head, pleading for acknowledgement. Yet little was done. At best, Williams was given light warnings, but no point deductions, no firm control. The crowd noticed. Commentators noticed. Everyone saw the pattern. And yet, the fight went on. Colón, determined to prove himself, kept pressing forward. He traded combinations, snapped his jab, and tried to shake off the growing discomfort. But anyone watching closely could see it. Something was wrong. As the rounds went by, the punishment mounted. The fight was close, competitive, even exciting at moments. But those repeated illegal blows told a darker story, one that would soon overshadow everything else. And by the 9th round, that story would explode into tragedy. By round 9, Colón looked different. His footwork was slower, his movements less sharp. He appeared disoriented, blinking hard as if trying to clear his vision. He continued to complain about the rabbit punches, but again, the warnings from the referee remained toothless. His corner, trying to manage the situation, made a critical error between rounds. In confusion, they removed his gloves, believing the fight was over. The referee ruled it a disqualification against Colón, giving Williams the win. But the fight was already lost in a much darker way. As Colón sat in the dressing room afterward, he complained of dizziness and headaches. Moments later, he collapsed. Panic set in. Medical staff rushed him to the hospital, where scans revealed a devastating reality. Colón had suffered a brain bleed. Doctors were forced to perform emergency surgery, removing part of his skull to relieve the swelling. The boxing world held its breath. Fans who had cheered his rise were now left in shock. How could this happen to such a young, talented fighter? How had a night meant to build his legacy instead shattered it in an instant? In the days that followed, Colón was placed in a coma. His undefeated record, his dreams of a championship, his identity as the next Puerto Rican star, all of it was gone in one night. But the tragedy didn't end in the hospital. In fact, it was only beginning. Prichard Colón's life after that night became a story of survival, resilience, and heartbreak. He spent months in a coma, unresponsive, his once bright career cut down in its prime. For most fighters, the story would have ended there, a tragic obituary in the annals of boxing history. But Colón's family refused to give up. His parents, Richard and Nieves, became his full-time caregivers, transforming their home into a space where he could receive constant treatment. Against the odds, Colón began to show small signs of progress. Over time, videos surfaced online, moments where he smiled, attempted to communicate, or responded during therapy. He underwent physical rehabilitation, trying to regain movement in his arms and legs. Therapists worked tirelessly to help him reclaim even the smallest fragments of independence. But the reality was harsh. Colón had been left with severe, permanent brain damage. Once a rising star with a perfect record, he was now confined to a wheelchair, dependent on his family for even the simplest daily tasks. His story became one of quiet inspiration for those who followed his recovery, but also of profound sorrow for what was lost. Yet, while his family fought for his life, another battle began. One outside the ring. They wanted accountability. They wanted answers. Why had the referee ignored the repeated fouls? Why had the ringside doctors allowed him to continue? Why had a system designed to protect fighters failed him so completely? And as lawsuits were filed and evidence revealed, the truth behind that night became even darker than anyone first realized. In the weeks after Prichard Colón's collapse, headlines ran across boxing outlets. Social media lit up with messages of support. Fans, fighters, and analysts all shared the same shock. How could this happen? How could a 23-year-old undefeated star, a man who seemed destined for titles, end up in a coma because of ignored fouls and preventable mistakes? But as weeks turned into months, and months into years, something unsettling happened. The story faded. Boxing moved on. New stars rose. New controversies replaced the old ones. And Colón, once a name on the lips of fans, became a whisper, a forgotten fighter in a sport that too often discards its broken warriors. Meanwhile, his opponent, Terrel Williams, continued his career. He fought again, though he never quite shook the shadow of that night. Interviews with Williams showed a man haunted, but also defensive. He insisted he hadn't meant to hurt Colón, but fans remembered the rabbit punches. They remembered the referee's inaction. To them, Williams wasn't just an opponent. He was the man forever tied to Colón's tragedy. And what about the officials? Referee Joe Cooper faced criticism, but no lasting punishment. The Virginia Commission admitted mistakes, but took no real accountability. The ringside doctor, who cleared Colón, quietly left out of most narratives. Everyone pointed fingers. No one accepted blame. Prichard's family, meanwhile, never stopped fighting. They cared for him around the clock, but they also pursued legal action. They wanted answers and justice. They believed their son hadn't simply been unlucky. He had been failed by the system designed to protect him. But the lawsuits and medical records revealed something more shocking. A detail buried in the aftermath that would deepen the tragedy and ignite controversy about whether Prichard's injury could have been prevented. And when that truth emerged, it changed the way people saw that night forever. The heart of the controversy wasn't just Terrel Williams's rabbit punches, though they were illegal, repeated, and largely unchecked. It wasn't just the referee who failed to deduct points or stop the pattern. It wasn't even the corner who mistakenly cut off Colón's gloves in confusion. It was all of it, a chain of failures that together created a perfect storm of negligence. Court documents revealed that Colón had complained of dizziness and discomfort between rounds even before he collapsed. The referee had heard his protests. The ringside doctor had been notified. Yet the fight continued, and when his corner mistakenly removed his gloves, rather than forcing a proper medical evaluation, the commission treated it as a procedural mistake instead of a health emergency. The lawsuits filed by Colón's family alleged gross negligence, that multiple people who should have protected him failed to act when the warning signs were obvious. The doctor, the referee, the commission all bore responsibility. And while boxing is no stranger to tragedy, this case was different. This wasn't just bad luck. This was a preventable disaster. Perhaps the most controversial fact? Williams was never penalized for the repeated rabbit punches, despite Colón's visible protests throughout the fight. It wasn't just that he fought through illegal shots. It was that the very authority in the ring ignored them until it was too late. That silence, that refusal to intervene, is what still haunts fans and outrages Colón's family today. For years, the case dragged on in courts, the family seeking financial relief to support his lifelong care. And while small legal victories came, the broader questions remained unanswered. How could boxing allow this to happen? And how many other fighters were still at risk because lessons from Colón's tragedy went unlearned? By the time the controversy was fully unraveled, the damage was already permanent. The fighter was gone. Only the man, broken but alive, remained. Today, nearly a decade later, Prichard Colón lives with his family in Florida. He requires constant care, much of it provided by his parents, who became his lifeline after that fateful night. And while the man who once danced around opponents with lightning jabs and ruthless combinations can no longer fight, he has shown something else: resilience. Videos released by his family show Prichard smiling, laughing, responding to therapy, even attempting to speak. They are small victories, but for those who know his story, they are monumental. Each moment is a reminder that though boxing took his career, it did not take his spirit. In Puerto Rico, Colón is still remembered. Fans speak his name alongside the greats, not because of what he achieved, but because of what he endured. His story became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the dangers fighters face and the responsibilities the sport often ignores. His family's fight for accountability continues, though boxing as an institution has largely moved on. And that is the cruelest truth of all. Colón's tragedy wasn't just about one fight. It was about how quickly the sport and its fans can forget, how easily a star in the making can become a ghost, how the system designed to protect fighters can instead abandon them. Yet, in that silence, Colón's legacy speaks louder than any belt could. He is the reminder that every punch carries risk, that safety is not optional, and that fighters are human beings first, entertainers second. His story forces the uncomfortable question: how many more more Prichard Colóns are waiting in boxing's future. For those who remember him, he is not just the boxer who was crippled. He is the fighter who was failed by referees, by doctors, by the system. And by remembering him, by keeping his name alive, the hope is that boxing will one day learn the lesson his tragedy demanded. Because behind every big drama show, every knockout, every roar of the crowd, there is the shadow of what happened to Prichard Colón, and that shadow will never go away.